Sebastian's voice rang out across the lawyer's office, soaked in smugness, like he'd already won some great prize. I wanted to hurl something at his perfect hair. Laughter erupted around the room, our entire family acting like my inheritance was some sort of inside joke. I sat quietly in my plain black dress, watching my brothers soak in their admiration, while everything I had built over the past decade was brushed aside like it meant nothing. My name is Anna Wells, 32 years old. For the past 10 years, I've been the driving force behind Timber Brewing, our family's construction firm in Portland, Oregon. While Sebastian was partying through college and globetrotting on our father's money, I was grinding through 80-hour weeks, negotiating contracts, overseeing payroll, dealing with clients and suppliers, and holding the company together. None of it seemed to matter to the people in this fancy wood-paneled office. Anna always did love her dollhouses, Aunt Patricia said with a fake dab at her dry eyes, her tone thick with mock sympathy. At least Sebastian understands business. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. Sebastian, who wouldn't know a 2x4 if it hit him, who thought a profit margin was some kind of notebook scribble. And yet, I didn't react. I'd learned that defending myself to this family was pointless, like arguing with a storm. Sebastian adjusted his overpriced tie and smirked. Let Anna play with her toys while I handle the real work. Dad always said the business needed strong leadership. That's when Mr. Harrison, our elderly family lawyer, cleared his throat. He'd known our family for decades, and there was something in his eyes, something steady and unexpected, that made me sit up straighter. A flicker of hope lit inside me. Actually, he said, cutting through the noise like a blade, the company was never in his name. The room went instantly silent. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, and in the sudden stillness, Sebastian's smirk faded to confusion, and inside me, something fierce began to rise, warm, electric, and long overdue. After a lifetime of being underestimated and sidelined, I had a feeling the ground was about to shift beneath their feet. Growing up the youngest in the Wells family meant learning to stay quiet, because no one really wanted to hear what I thought. My father, Thomas Wells, was a tough, old-school man who built his company from nothing, starting with a rusty truck and a set of second-hand tools. When my mother, Caroline, died when I was 12, I was left to find my way through the world of hard hats and steel beams alone. Sebastian, 5 years older, was always the favorite, the football star, the prom king, the so-called prodigy. He coasted through business school with B-average grades. Everyone pretended were straight A's. Meanwhile, I spent my teenage years on construction sites, learning the ropes by doing the work no one else wanted. There's a world of difference between understanding how concrete behaves under pressure and knowing which marble looks best in a foyer, and I knew which one actually mattered. I had spent years learning why foundation work was the backbone of any project, while the rest of the family swooned over surface-level polish. Anna's got a good head for numbers, my father would say at gatherings, like it was some endearing quirk instead of a legitimate skill that kept the company running. She keeps me organized. But it was always more than that, and deep down, I think he knew it, even if he never said it outright. When Sebastian finished college and declared he was going to find himself on a year-long backpacking trip across Europe, I was the one who stepped in. I handled the mess when our biggest client threatened to walk away from a $1 million contract. I was the one who negotiated, reassured, and saved the deal. When we were on the verge of losing 3 of our top employees to a competitor, I redesigned redesigned our benefits package from the ground up and kept them. I could read blueprints, navigate zoning laws, and argue union clauses with a straight face. I knew how to walk onto a site and spot an issue in minutes, be it safety, quality, or scheduling. Sebastian, he had stepped foot on a job site exactly twice, and both times had complained about the dust ruining his shoes. Sebastian will take over when I retire, my father would announce at family dinners, and everyone would nod as if it was gospel. He's got the Wells leadership gene. What they mistook for leadership was actually charm and coasting, an ability to schmooze clients over overpriced dinners without a clue what was in the contracts he was pretending to understand. He could throw around buzzwords like synergy and market trends, but he didn't know what it cost to pour a slab or what it took to reframe a roofline. Still, I kept my head down. I managed problems before they became disasters, kept our crews motivated, and built trust with subcontractors who respected me, even if my family didn't. I told myself that one day it would all count for something, that they would see what I'd given up, how I carried the weight, and now, sitting in that heavy, wood-paneled office with the silence hanging thick in the air after Mr. Harrison's quiet revelation, I realized maybe my father had seen. The question was, had he acted on it? 3 months earlier, I'd been the one sitting by his hospital bed in those final days, holding his hand as the machines beeped steadily around us. Sebastian was in Miami for some so-called conference that looked more like a poolside getaway. By the time he returned, I'd already made the funeral arrangements. In one of my father's lucid moments, he looked at me and whispered, "You've been my right hand all these years. You understand this business better than anyone." I told him not to worry, that I had everything under control. But there was something in his eyes, like he was carrying something heavier than he could say. He kept glancing toward his old leather briefcase in the corner of the room, the one he never let out of his sight during work hours. "Anna," he said softly, so faint I had to lean in, "the dolls, your grandmother's collection. It's not just about sentiment." At the time, I assumed he meant the emotional value, the history behind the antiques. My grandmother's doll collection had been passed down for generations. I never quite liked them, truth be told. They always gave me a vaguely unsettling feeling, but I knew they were valuable. Some dated back to the 1800s, handcrafted by artisans whose techniques had long since disappeared. They were rare, delicate, beautiful in their own way. But now, watching Mr. Harrison methodically sort through his paperwork, a new possibility crept into my mind. Maybe my father's words had meant more than I realized. Maybe there had been another layer. "The business ownership," Sebastian demanded, his voice higher pitched than usual. "What do you mean it was never in his name?" His eyes were wide, teetering on panic. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and opened a thick manila folder with the slow, practiced movements of someone who understood the power of silence. "Your father transferred ownership of Timbermere Brewing to Anna 5 years ago," he said evenly. "She has been the legal owner since then." The change was kept confidential at Mr. Wells's request. The air seemed to press in from all sides. My heart thundered in my chest, but I kept my face calm, unreadable. 5 years ago, right when Sebastian was off in Thailand, finding himself while I was neck-deep managing our largest contract to date. "That's not possible," Sebastian said, though the conviction in his voice was already slipping. "I'm his son. I'm supposed to inherit the business." Mr. Harrison didn't flinch. "What you're inheriting pertains to your father's personal estate. The house, his private investments, and family heirlooms. The business has belonged to Anna since 2019. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Around me, faces shifted, whispers passed like static. The smug warmth from earlier was gone, replaced with confusion and quiet disbelief. Sebastian's face had drained of color, and for the first time in my life, he was looking at me not with pity or disdain, but something closer to respect, or maybe it was fear. "This has to be a mistake," he said louder now. "Anna doesn't know how to run a company. She's just the bookkeeper." His words struck like a slap, but instead of fury, I felt something colder, sharper. I had been called just the bookkeeper so many times it barely registered anymore. Only now those words didn't sting, they signaled the end of the illusion. I watched him flail through denial, anger, and creeping panic as the truth settled in. Mr. Harrison, unbothered, slid a heavy legal document across the table. "There's no mistake. Miss Wells has been the sole owner and operator of Timbermere Brewing since September 15, 2019. Your father made the transfer to protect the business from potential creditors and to ensure operational continuity under experienced management. The phrase echoed in my head like music. I didn't say anything, but I tasted the words, sweet and vindicating. For years I had watched Sebastian hijack meetings, claim my work as his own, and patronize me with half-baked business advice. And now, finally, the mask was off, and the room was seeing the truth for the first time. "But I went to business school," Sebastian protested, as if his degree outweighed my 10 years of real-world experience. "I have an MBA from Portland State with a 2.8 GPA, I replied quietly, breaking my silence since Mr. Harrison had dropped the bombshell. "From a program you dragged out for 5 years, taking random semesters off to find yourself." The whole family turned to look at me like I'd grown wings. Aunt Patricia's jaw dropped, and Cousin Jake let his coffee cup fall to the floor. It clattered, but no one moved to pick it up. "Anna," my stepmother Diane scolded, "that's no way to speak to your brother." "You're right," I said, rising from my chair for the first time since we'd entered the office. "I should address him properly." I turned to Sebastian. "As the owner of Timbermere Brewing, thank you for your consistent lack of contribution to our success." I watched his hands tremble as my words sank in. The golden boy, always favored, always shielded, was finally in a moment where charm and family ties couldn't rescue him. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but his voice had lost its usual swagger. "Dad always said I'd take over. We talked about it all the time." "You talked?" I corrected. He listened. "Big difference." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat politely. "Perhaps I should outline the complete transfer. Your father was meticulous in his paperwork. Miss Wells, shall I proceed?" I nodded and settled into my chair. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. Around me, the celebration had vanished. My relatives sat in stunned silence, struggling to process how badly they misjudged the situation. "The transfer includes all business assets, contracts, equipment, and intellectual property," Mr. Harrison continued. "Miss Wells also assumed all debts, which she has successfully managed over the last 5 years. Under her leadership, the company's value has grown by roughly 40%. Sebastian made a choking sound. I glanced over. His face was pale with a green tinge. That 40% growth wasn't luck. It came from relentless planning, long hours, and sacrifices he never acknowledged. "Now," Mr. Harrison said. Shall we move to the personal estate distribution? That part felt like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Sebastian inherited the family home, which seemed grand until Mr. Harrison mentioned its $300,000 mortgage. He also received our father's personal investments had been heavily drained over the past few years to fund Sebastian's numerous business ventures and extended vacations. The antique doll collection, Mr. Harrison announced, goes to Anna, along with all related documentation and appraisals. Sebastian actually laughed, though it came out more like a sharp bark than genuine amusement. See, I told you she gets the dolls. At least some things make sense. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was practically buzzing with excitement. My father's earlier remark about the dolls being more than sentimental was finally clicking. During his last days, he'd mentioned documentation and appraisals, terms that hadn't meant much at the time. Mr. Harrison, I said carefully, could you please elaborate on the appraisals? The elderly lawyer smiled, a hint of mischief shining in his eyes. Certainly. Your grandmother's collection consists of 47 pieces, including rare Juno dolls from the 1870s and a complete set of early Madame Alexander collectibles. The most recent appraisal, completed last year, valued the collection at $512,000. The silence was so intense I could hear someone's stomach growl. Sebastian's laughter died abruptly, and he stared at me as if realizing he'd been playing chess while everyone else played checkers. $500,000, Aunt Patricia whispered. For dolls? Antique dolls are serious investments, Mr. Harrison explained. Miss Wells's great-grandmother began the collection in the 1920s, and each generation carefully added pieces. Your father was very proud of Anna's knowledge of the collection's history and value. I had always been the family member who listened to my grandmother's stories, helped research each doll's origin, and maintained their condition. While Sebastian rolled his eyes and joked about creepy old toys, I was learning about craftsmanship, history, and market value. So let me get this straight, Sebastian said slowly, panic barely restrained in his voice. Anna gets a business worth millions, plus $500,000 in antiques, and I get a house with a massive mortgage. You also get Dad's car, Diane offered weakly, as if a decade-old pickup could even the scales. Timbermere Brewing Company, Mr. Harrison added, consulting his notes, was appraised at $2.3 million last month. Miss Wells has managed the company's finances, operations, and strategy for 5 years, all while holding majority ownership. I watched Sebastian do the math in his head, his face cycling through disbelief and defeat. $2.3 million for the business, plus $512,000 for the dolls, and the satisfaction of finally being acknowledged for my real contributions. Meanwhile, he was left with a house he couldn't afford and a truck needing a new transmission. This can't be legal, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. There has to be something we can do. Anna tricked him somehow, Sebastian insisted. Actually, I said, standing up again and smoothing my skirt, I think it's time I explained exactly how this happened. 5 years ago, I started noticing how everyone leaned forward despite themselves. Sebastian was in Thailand searching for his spiritual center while I was managing the Patterson Heights development project. You remember that one, don't you, Sebastian? The $20 million contract that nearly fell apart because of permitting issues. His eyes darted around, looking Your father faced potential personal liability that could have endangered his personal assets, including the family home. So he called me into his office, I recalled, as vivid as if it were yesterday. He told me he'd been watching me handle more complex responsibilities and wanted to protect both the business and the family. The solution was to transfer ownership to someone who truly understood the company's operations. But why didn't he tell us? Diane asked, her earlier sharpness softened. Because he knew exactly how you'd react, I replied. Just like you're reacting now, shocked that Anna might actually be capable of running something more complicated than a lemonade stand. Sebastian finally found his voice again. This is insane. You can't just hand over a multi-million-dollar company without consulting the family. He didn't give it away, I said, letting steel edge my voice for the first time. I earned it. Every 18-hour day, every crisis I solved, every relationship I built with clients and suppliers. While we were posting Instagram photos from beach resorts, I was making sure our workers still had jobs. I pulled out a folder I'd brought but hadn't planned to use. I have 5 years of financial records showing company growth under my management, testimonials from clients, suppliers, employees, documentation of every major decision and problem I've solved. Mr. Harrison looked impressed. Your father said you were thorough, but I didn't realize you'd compiled such detailed records. I learned early, I said, glancing pointedly at Sebastian, that in this family, if you want anyone to believe you actually did the work, you have to document everything. Too many times I watched others take credit for my efforts. The room fell silent once again, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't the stunned quiet of people absorbing unexpected news. It was the uneasy stillness of those realizing they'd been fundamentally wrong. So what happens now? Sebastian asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I looked at him, the brother who'd spent 37 years coasting on charm and family ties, never questioning his right to inherit everything Dad had built. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Now, I said, you figure out how to make your own way in the world, just like I did. Gathering my papers, I stood up, ready to leave the office where I had just officially become one of Portland's wealthiest young women. But before I reached the door, I turned back once more. Oh, and Sebastian, the business isn't hiring right now. The aftermath of the will reading was everything I'd hoped for, and more. Sebastian stumbled out of Mr. Harrison's office, looking like he'd been run over by a freight train, while Aunt Patricia and Diane whispered fiercely in the hallway about unfair surprises and ungrateful children. I walked past them all, head held high, clutching the folder containing 5 years of proof that I had earned every penny of my inheritance. Anna, wait, Sebastian called after me as I reached the elevator. His voice had lost all arrogance, replaced by desperation. I turned, noticing how his once expensive suit looked worn, and his perfect hair was disheveled. What exactly do you want to talk about, Sebastian? How you never once asked about my work. How you assumed you deserved to inherit a business you never bothered to understand. Or how you spent the last hour insulting my intelligence in front of the whole family. He opened his mouth but closed it again, realizing any answer would only make things worse. You know what's funny? I said, stepping into the elevator. I actually would have been willing to work with you if you'd shown even a little respect for what I do or taken 5 minutes to learn the business. We could have been partners, but you were too busy being handed everything to notice someone else was doing all the work. As the elevator doors began to close, Sebastian made a half-hearted move to follow me, but I raised my hand. Don't, I said firmly. You made made your choice a long time ago, choosing to treat me like I was invisible, like my work didn't matter. Now, you live with the consequences. As the elevator descended, I caught a glimpse of Sebastian's reflection in the polished doors, standing alone in the hallway, surrounded by family members who looked at him with the same mix of disappointment and pity they once reserved for me. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my newly redecorated office at Timbermere Brewing headquarters, reviewing expansion plans. That kind of success would have been impossible under Sebastian's expected leadership. The nameplate on my desk, owner and chief executive officer, still gave me a little thrill every time I saw it. My assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Wells, there's a Sebastian Wells here to see you. He says he's your brother." I looked up from the architectural blueprint spread across my conference table. Outside my office window, I could see our newest construction site, a sustainable housing development that would be featured in next month's Portland Business Journal. The project was my design, my vision, and my responsibility. "Send him in," I said. Sebastian entered looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and he carried the defeated posture of someone who had run out of options. "Nice office," he said, though his voice lacked any real appreciation. "I heard you're expanding into green construction." "We are," I replied without standing or offering a chair. "It's a growing market, and we're positioned to be regional leaders in sustainable building practices." He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the awards on my walls, the photos of completed projects, and the architectural certificates I'd earned while he traveled the world. "Anna," he said finally, "I need a job." The words hung between us, and I realized this was the moment I'd unconsciously been waiting for. Sebastian Wells, the golden boy who had never worked a day in his life, was asking his little sister for a job. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it, "but we're not hiring." Sebastian's life unraveled quickly after the will reading, as word spread through Portland's business circles about the dramatic reversal at Timbermere Brewing. His reputation as a future leader crumbled once people learned he'd expected to inherit a company his sister had actually been running for years. His lack of real experience became painfully clear when he tried to find work at construction or development firms familiar with the Wells family history. The family home became a financial burden he couldn't handle, forcing him to take a sales associate job at a car dealership while struggling to keep up with mortgage payments on a property he couldn't afford. Within 6 months, Sebastian moved into a small apartment, watching from a distance as I expanded the business he'd taken for granted. Knowing his years of dismissing my work had cost him everything he expected to inherit. As I signed the contract for our fourth major expansion project, I reflected on how Sebastian's years of mockery had unknowingly prepared me for this moment. His constant dismissal pushed me to document every success, prove every point, and build a comprehensive track record that made my ownership undeniable when the truth finally came out. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply letting people realize that the one they underestimated was actually in control all along,